Hello, my name is Chris, and I curate the Children's Literature Research Collection at the Free Library of Philadelphia. This is the first in what I hope will be a long line of in depth conversations about the career of an author or an illustrator associated with children's books. Today's guest is the wonderful, award winning author illustrator Nina Cruz. Nina is known for her distinctive photo collage works, but she's recently begun working with digitally illustrated collage. Today, we'll talk about her career, the reasons behind her change in artistic output, and why I should never not wear black. If you like this conversation, we have some other great videos online from a series called Profiles in Literature, created by Dr. Jacqueline Schachter-Weiss. I'm hoping future me has figured out how to insert a link on the screen for that series, but if not, it's in the description. Thanks for joining me, and hope to see you again soon.
Hey, thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our inaugural episode of
Conversations in Children's Literature.
We haven't picked a title yet, so so hopefully you've just seen me a really, really bad version of a lip sync in there. For the inaugural episode of this, I was really scratching my head of who to talk to and who would be an exciting guest, and the name that just immediately shot to the top was Nina Cruz. Hey, Nina, how are you?
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great to
Actually, do
see
you have
you.
any thoughts on a good title? We're thinking conversations in children's literature, but I will defer to you if you have one. Feel free to shout it out at any time.
Okay, I'll give it some thought. At the moment, no, that sounds pretty good to start as a starting point.
Um, the I talked about this in the introduction, but the reason we're doing this is there was a great series in Philadelphia called Profiles in Literature that ran from the late 1960s all the way through to 2001. It was a hybrid program between Temple that was co-sponsored by the Free Library, and two amazing women sat down and had half-an-hour conversations with authors and illustrators. And the reason for the series as a whole to start was they showed these video cassettes in library school to future children's librarians. And Dr. Schachter, the woman who started this, Schachter-Weiss, she passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But her son very nicely donated copies of the entire series to the library. So we have them freely available online on YouTube. And I was hoping that we could kind of continue this theme and kind of take inspiration from it to have a longer conversation with people to just talk about their careers and why they do things and how it all came together. Um, I last saw you last year, the year before, at the Green Willow 50th anniversary party. And
Yes.
it was such a fun night. I want to thank you. I have to tell you this quick side story. I have horrible social anxiety, horrible, and I hate going to these events because you're always thinking like, oh God, have I met you? And if I have met you, what have you written or what have you illustrated? Have I read it? And did I like it? And all these things. And there's like all this bubbling in the background. And is a little thing, but it really meant a lot. We were at the party and I saw you and you turned, you just said, "Hi, Chris." And for whatever reason, it really that memory's frozen in my brain because it pulled me out of the like, I have to be on to I can just enjoy myself while I'm here. Um, and I don't remember if it was you, someone, it was either you or one of Aliki's children said to me that it was a little surreal being at the 50th anniversary of Green Willow because it wasn't the same office, but they grew up in the offices and they were seeing people they hadn't seen in a very long time. Um, was that you who said that to me? I don't
I
remember.
think it was probably one of Aliki's children.
Okay, all right.
No.
But you grew, I mean, your father, to get into it, your father is Donald Cruz.
Mm,
Huge, huge, huge deal in children's literature.
yes.
Uh, what was it like growing up with Donald Cruz as your dad?
Well, I think like everybody's dad, he was dad. So, in terms of what that means, it doesn't. it doesn't impact you in the way we all grow up with our own reality of whoever it is that we happen to be raised by, right? So, I think that's true for everybody. For my experience and my sister's experience, most of our childhood, our younger childhood, they were working graphic designers. And, my dad would occasionally be working on a book project, and my sister or I, or both of us would be called in to all right, stand here, hold this, let me draw your hand, we just stand still for a minute. But, most of their daily business was stuff that we weren't particularly involved in, interested in, or anything like that. It was, various projects, they did some book jackets and political campaign stuff and new textbook things and whatever. It was not really our world. Our childhood with them, though, was one where we spent a lot of time making things, doing things together. And the handmade project was the best project. The hand-drawn card, the Christmas cards were all made together. They found an old printing press at one point. So we were doing printing press, or we were doing silk screen. So there was a sense of art being kind of part of how you spend family time for us.
I mentioned your father, and of course your mother was also a graphic designer, and Jonas,
Yes.
and children's book author as well, later in her career. Where is your archive of those cards and things? Do you have a collection of them still?
Oh, we all save everything in various forms, so they're around in different corners. I don't know that nobody's organized them too much, but we definitely have a fair amount of that stuff. And after my mother passed, we had an exhibit up at the Brooklyn Public Library, and so we did pull together some of those particular things that she had done. And my dad even had, she had been the top student in their class at Cooper and gotten to design the end of the year sort of event. So he had copies of that. So the ephemera is around somewhere.
Were they both working out of the home, or were they going to an office when you were growing up to do their design work?
Yeah, their office was in our house, usually, at a separate room, a separate apartment, depending on the arrangement of the space. And so they were always working nearby, which worked out well for my mom, of course, because then she could be, she didn't have to worry about finding a sitter and stuff like that. And, they could work their hours whenever and that kind of thing.
How off limits was the office? Was it, it's like the white couch in the formal living room, where you don't go in there except on Christmas and maybe a funeral, or was it a
They were very open. They were very generous. There were some supplies we were not allowed. We really wanted to get our hands on all the, the Letraset. There used to be a way to comp out type with little stick-ons, but it was really expensive. But so the stuff that was broken and worn out, we could use and play with, and but there were certain things we weren't allowed to touch, but a lot of stuff we were allowed to kind of get our hands into, which was nice.
I mean, I know your sister's an artist. You're obviously an artist. Do you remember when you first got bit by the bug to say, I'm going to do this professionally?
I don't know when I actually really got bit by the bug. I did have the Dr. Seuss, my book about me, which whatever year that came out. And I did write that I wanted to be an artist in it. So, I guess it was always sort of within my idea of what, seemed like, one, it seemed possible. Two, it seemed like a kind of a great way to do things, watching my parents do it.
Did they have a reaction to that? I mean, were they pro, con, or politically neutral in terms of artists as a child?
I don't think we talked about it as a child. I don't think it was not part of the conversation. I mean, I don't remember it being part of our conversation. But I think for them, I think in general, as I got older and clearly expressed an interest in being involved in the arts, they definitely were pro. However, guarded and recognizing that art is not always an easy place to be. And I definitely saw them, go through those lean times when, there's, trying to figure out what to do between projects and, trying to hustle and get things going. So, it wasn't like it was clearly, oh yeah, this is like no problem because everybody can do it and they're just successful. It wasn't clearly that. It was clearly that it was work. So I think that they definitely have their hesitations, but also we're excited that I was and my sister were both, you know, interested and engaged in the same things they were engaged in. That was exciting to them.
That's wonderful to hear. I always think of just the I've talked to a lot of illustrators who say things along the lines of like, I hope my child never does this. This is so stressful.
Right, right.
It's great to feel that. Did you feel stress kind of following in the footsteps of, you know, my father is a big name. Like, you're right. So how does that affect you when you're starting out?
Well, so I didn't really think that I would do children's books for many years. So that was part of it. So kind of like, so when I was at Yale, I decided I would concentrate on photography. So I was doing a lot of photography. When I graduated, I, was got a little bit of illustration work, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go into film, and realized I didn't really like film production sets at all. Being in those situations was not an experience I enjoyed, but landed in animation production where they always need hands. I started working on Pee-wee's Playhouse, the first season, the pilot in the first season of the TV show. And, it was all the training that I had, from school and at home of making things with anything, right? So that was a great place to kind of get involved and be with a group of other young artists who were paying their rent, right? So we were all doing different things, and a lot of interesting people came kind of through that studio and some went on to children's books, some went on to, stayed in film and moved on to, Blue Sky and Pixar and all these other places too. So it was a real range of people, and others went on to full fine art careers. So it was a nice experience for me because I was in a community of artists who were all finding their way forward and paying their rent. Very important.
Right.
So, and so while I was doing that and getting different job experiences, I was kind of building really a clearer voice, a clearer portfolio of work and what it could be that I would do that was specifically me, right? So I think when you're in school, you usually are working mostly towards, most of us are working towards the assignment, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the end of your thesis gets closer to the thing that is kind of speaks from us, really, but it's not until, it takes time to really sort of then take all the things you're taking in and start to gel them into something that seems much more specifically about you.
What
so that's
your
kind of
thesis?
what I was doing. My thesis was actually portraits of mostly of friends. I used a 2¼ square format and a little bit of 35, but I just photographed a lot of the people who I was at college with, and then also some family as well. So it was just a series of portraits, all done kind of a little bit, they're all very still, but they were also usually, never extra lights, nothing very close up, very kind of environmentally placed. So people were sitting back in a scene or whatever it was in the room they were in, or,
Early works. I'm intrigued when you're looking at the back matter of books. Nowadays, children's books are very, very sophisticated. Well, they will tell you the medium that a book uses, and that I think is probably something that started post-digitally for the most part, for you to see it listed in. But early work that's not included. It's for your work, photo collage. But
right.
Early on, can you talk a little bit about the process when you were assembling? I mean, one hot summer day, it is shocking to me how contemporary it still looks.
Which is fabulous, because that is one of the things that I felt I heard early on about why people didn't want to publish photography books, was because that they would feel dated. So that's always been, I think, the concern, styles change and things like that. But I'm glad that it is not considered dated, and I don't think it feels dated in many ways, in many respects, which maybe speaks to the way that our society has changed and stayed the same over the last 30 years, because it is now 30 years in print. Print came out in 1995, and we're 2025 now. So it is still available.
I was walking through our children's section at Parkway Central Library, and it was on display. There's one page. There's one page only. And the only thing is the make and
Yeah.
model of the cars in the picture. It's the only
Absolutely,
way
yeah.
that hits it. How much input did you have when you were presenting this? What was your dummy like when you went in to pitch this?
Well, I can show you. This is actually a copy of the dummy, which is it's about twice the size. So even though it's still small, the actual dummy is about 3 by 3, but it's kind of fallen to pieces. But yeah, so the story of One Hot Summer Day is that I did this book with Susan Hirschman at Green Willow Books. And, I knew her first, as my parents' editor, who I met, a few times at various events that we'd get invited to come along to. I worked one summer in Green Willow's office, so got to read the slush pile for her, help Ava Weiss, the art director, mock up dummies and, sort things alphabetically for the production manager. Ada, whose last name I'm spacing on. Anyway, so sort things for the production manager. So it was, I got my feet into children's books as just before starting college. But when I went to meet with Susan, we were discussing a project that someone else had illustrated, and I had my portfolio, like I said, a clearer voice of who I was as an artist. And she said, well, we like your work, but we don't want you to illustrate this because this author is also a new author. We don't want to have two people, debuting on this isn't the right project for you, so come back. And so when I brought her this, and I'll hold this up again, you see there's not really a cover here, but I'll show you some of the interior pages. I had used photographs I had around, went to the copy shop, also used, swipes from magazines, the picture file at the library, wherever it was I could find just some things to put together into a dummy for the book, and typed on the typewriter. So this is very low tech, of course, because I did not own a computer. There was no chance I was going to have a computer anytime soon. They were, at that point, I think that was probably before actually Photoshop even maybe existed. I'm not sure what year they actually began that program, but in any case, this was the time when to take a photograph digitally was very expensive, and it was also very slow. Like digital photography was like very much in its infancy. So of course I was shooting film. So the process was I showed this to Susan. So Susan Hirschman had the kind of autonomy that I don't think existed even for many people in that era in 1993, and certainly doesn't exist now, where she was able to look at a project and make an offer right there on the spot that day. So she said, we love this. We want to publish it, and this is what you're going to get as your advance, and this is going to be, and we want to have it by this date. And so I just sat there, okay, there's nothing that you, so I started. That was how I began. Of course, that doesn't happen in most cases. People have to go through acquisitions meetings and, go back and forth and all those things. And you don't get to sit in somebody's office anymore either, right? So you send things in digitally.
That's amazing for people who are younger than we are by a couple of years. They probably don't remember the joys of shooting on film. The number of photographs that you have obviously was limited. You had a roll of 24, 36, maybe 40, 48. Was there 48 back then?
Yeah.
And what kind of camera were you using to get these shots? I mean, professional quality, full setup with the zoom lens, etc. Or what was the style for you? What was the
I had a Nikon 35 millimeter. I don't believe I probably was using a fixed length lens. I'm not sure that I was shooting with a zoom lens for that particular camera. But yeah, so I shot a bunch of 35 millimeter film. I then took it to get processed and just had the 4x6 prints made of everything. because from there I could then start to actually really mock up and plan out what I would do for the finished collages. Right, so I had, I had small prints, and then I could Xerox them at different sizes and play around with all the things that I wanted to do for scale, and plan out what I wanted for the finished prints, because in the end I made collages that were book size, right? So once you make, and of course that would be very expensive to make without having a plan ahead of what you want to do.
So cutting up the pictures, arranging, setting, etc., to make the final design.
Mhm.
How many versions of the dummy do you go through in a situation like that? I mean, I would imagine by virtue of having to have the photo, keep resizing, if you want it up 10%, it's another trip to the copy shop. Or for you making that ahead of time, where you said, let me make this in 3 different sizes so I can play around.
Yes. Well, all the years I had at that point doing animation production, I actually sort of had a sense of order, I think, from working in production for other people, that, okay, so I'm going to the copy shop, I'm going to be here for an hour, and I've got all these pictures I've selected that I want to work with. So I'm going to make this one at, 6 different sizes, and this one at this size, and this one, so I just went through, like, I had a plan before I would go to the copy shop, and I just made a lot of extra copies. So I'd have enough stuff to cover, like you say, those decisions between, do I need a little bigger, a little smaller, as best you can, so you don't have to take too many trips back and forth to the copy shop,
So essentially, even like pre-dummy, if you're in like your thumbnail, you're storyboarding out where you want everything to go so that you can get it as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Yes, I think that's always the way you're kind of working through, is you're always, each step of it, you're sort of finding your way more clearly to what the final thing is going to look like. I mean, when I did this in this manner, I think, after a while, I stopped making dummies in this way, where I would do collaging. But this was me trying to be clear about what it was I was going to eventually give them, which would have been a collaged book. But later I just started drawing my dummies, which was much more helpful for me to really envision what it is that I wanted to photograph, and what the and cut some of those other steps shorter, as you're saying, in terms of composition, because from this I didn't really have a lot of good stuff to work with to figure out what the composition was going to be. So here we can look at compare. So here it says, I run into the shade and draw pictures. And here's the picture that's in the book.
Once you have all of this designed, you sat down with your editor, you agreed upon the style, etc. You start to work on the finished product. Again, you're saying we're at a time before Photoshop, we're at a time before digital work. How was the original collage done? I mean, are you just using an X-Acto knife to cut things out and layer?
Well, first I had to go get the prints made. Now, I could have sent them to a lab, but that would have cost me a lot more money than going and renting lab time to do the color printing myself, which also meant a little bit more time, a little bit of a learning curve, because I didn't have that much experience with it, but that's what I did. So I printed the stuff, because I had my finished fixed dummy that showed exactly what I wanted to do, what sizes things were going to be. So I knew I wasn't going to waste a lot of paper. And then printed everything out, and then sat at home with my X-Acto knife and cut everything out. I carefully put magic marker along the edges of the pictures, because the photo paper is thick, so you'd have a white line. So to cover the white line a bit, I covered the edges with colors to match. So I had a bunch of matching markers, and then I pasted it together. I found a very an adhesive that you could kind of lay down really flat, because that was also another question. You couldn't just use Elmer's glue, would have been all wobbly or something.
And then from there, sent off to the publishing house. They did the reproductions, etc. Where are your originals? Do you still have them, or do they go by the wayside?
I still have them. Like I said, we keep stuff.
I know. It's funny. It's something where I think you treasure a childhood card sometimes more than you treasure something as an adult. But I'm glad to hear they're still there. I'm curious for myself because in our collection, the dummies that we have are usually made very quickly. Sometimes the final artwork was also, depending on the year, they just wanted to get it produced and get made. So they're decomposing because the materials aren't archivally sound. How are things holding up? I mean, are they staying fresh and clean, or is that fixative causing you any kind of grief?
Well, I did actually use a fixative that was pretty low. I'm not sure if it's fully archival, but it's definitely low. It's not as toxic as a lot of things. So they're holding up pretty well as pages go. I mean, they're only mounted on just not even illustration board, a thin piece of cardboard, because when they get scanned, it needed to be something that was somewhat flexible, because the scanner is a big steel drum, so they needed to be able to bend. So yeah, so they're holding up all right. They seem to be, probably there's a bit of because the one other thing that happens with photography is the chemicals can sometimes still come through. So probably a little bit of chemical damage, but nothing terrible.
Well, how did you feel when it came out, both in terms of fan response, but also home response?
Well, I didn't really have I wasn't really involved in the children's book world in a sense. I was kind of doing my own thing. So doing a children's book was kind of, I wasn't really that tuned in terms of the overall. I mean, we got some really nice reviews, so that was good. And I believe it got on somebody's list, which was also great to hear. But I didn't have a lot of expectations about any of that. But the overall response was very positive. And I mean, I think the fact that it's still in print is a sign that, more people were excited about it than I probably realized at the time,
Yeah. How long before, so it came out in 95, and then Snowball, I believe, was the next that came out in 97. So how much downtime did you have between the one and saying, okay, let's start another book?
I mean, one of the things working with Susan was she also was like, okay, when I turned in the art for One Hot Summer Day, she said, so what's next? And so, and of course, while I'm doing this, I'm also doing other work. So this is not me like, okay, this is all I do. This is between the various animation jobs. And I said, okay, well, let me think about what's next. And I brought her I'll Catch the Moon, and she liked that. And so we did that book. And then I brought her Snowball, and we did that book. And that worked out pretty well for a few years, I'd say. So the first 5 years or so, we just kept, I'd go bring her another idea. She'd say, yeah, and then we do it. Then it started to gap out a little.
In the meetings, how much did she honor your vision, or how much did she have editorial changes that she wanted? Are her fingerprints on it, or does it primarily look like what you envisioned going in?
So she would never accept a book if she didn't think it was ready. And so I believe I'll Catch the Moon and definitely You Are Here. I'm not sure if I had to do a second round on Snowball, but she'd look at it sometimes, what you brought in, and say, I like this. I think you can do better, was often a thing she might say. Or she might say, you're not there yet. So she would definitely give you, she wouldn't just go along with anything unless she felt it was really ready to go. She also, though, had an incredible amount of trust towards what it was I might be doing, because at one point she said, I think maybe it was Snowball, she said, I'm always so surprised to see what the book actually looks like when you bring it in. And I'm going like, really? Because I, of course, figured we were completely on the same page, even though, in fact, I probably also didn't really know what the book was going to look like as I was working away on it until it was there. But, it was always that sort of sense of trust that we will find our way forward, and it'll work out. So
I want to jump a little ahead. One of my favorites is a ghost story, because it's just bonkers. I love this story so much. I love the fact that you have multiple narrators. I love the fact that you're color coding your backgrounds to give you a visual clue of who's talking. I love the fact that the narrators may not always be reliable. It is so incredibly sophisticated. It just makes me very happy. Something that I've always, any library that I was in when I was an active children's librarian, we had a copy of this, and this was a book that got pulled out, obviously, this time of year. We're shooting this in October. But even during the school year, I just loved any time pulling it out. And that cover is amazing. It's just, again, it just like One Hot Summer, One Hot Summer Day, it is so fresh and vibrant and new. Talk to me about this book. Where did this come from?
Well, I'm so pleased that this book is one of your favorites because this book really kind of ended up falling a bit through the cracks on the commercial level. I think it was actually a time when I think Morrow just was selling to HarperCollins, I believe. Anyway, it was a kind of big publishing consolidation time, and I felt like everything kind of hit at the wrong moment for that particular project. But anyway, so and everyone asks me when I do a school visit, like, so what's your favorite book? And I'm like, I don't have a favorite book because each one kind of is like a whole separate little journey and thing. This one started as a few separate little ideas that weren't a book. So there was the story about the ghost story, the story Diva, like these voices, the three main voices, Jonathan, who sees the ghost, his sister, who is the diva, and the uncle, who's the cowboy, were all very just sort of like, they were just there, I had these voices going and I started to write them down. I found in my digging in my stuff that I actually also had, at some point in my notes for this book, written down a quote from something, Andre's Dream by Romare Bearden. I don't know where that is and what exactly Andre's Dream is. Anyway, the quote is, "The day is gone, so peaceful and calm. Now the day is done. Andre, his mama calls, come and get your dinner." The dream was gone. Andre promised himself to come back to this dream someday soon. So I just, clearly, I still love that quote. I need to go back and figure out where it is. But I think that I just was very interested in the two children's interior stories, in the way in which they're very different. I had my own ghosts that I, quote, saw when I was a kid, but I was also very clear in my mind that those ghosts weren't actually real, which is why the ghost in the ghost story acts as it does. Like, it doesn't actually exist, but it also needs validation, right? So it needs to really be understood as being there because the boy Jonathan is feeling misunderstood and unheard and unseen. So he sees a ghost. That's the explanation for things that can't be explained. So that was my first story was Zachary, the boy who's Jonathan, the young man who plays Jonathan's name is Zachary. That's why that one was in my head too. So Jonathan's ghost story is kind of that part, that the time in childhood, which I think probably happens to every kid at one point, where you feel like nobody else is nobody's seeing you, nobody's hearing you when there's something on your mind, right? And Alexa is that other thing that also is just sort of, we also often celebrate and love about kids, is when they are completely filled with the confidence and that kind of self-love that is kind of building, right? It builds love it brings love to you, right? That kind of experience, the way she experiences the world. So that was the story that I loved. Just thinking about what that is, and that kind of experience of feeling so happy within oneself and confident and sure. And then the uncle, the cowboy story, was a combination of having gone to the desert, to Joshua Tree, probably the year before, the summer before, and just being amazed at how incredibly beautiful it was, and so very different from, the Northeast, which is, my home. And, learning about, the having gone to the National Black Rodeo, which at that point had performed at Battery Park City, downtown Manhattan, and that there was, a tradition of Black cowboys. And I just loved that story and wanted to kind of talk about within that story somewhere. So the uncle had moved out to the desert. That was just sort of the way it came together, all these stories.
I I love hearing all the background about this, and for people who are listening or watching, please, please, please go out and find a copy of this book and read it. Um, where in the process did these three stories merge? Did they merge when you were presenting it early on, or is it something where one story wasn't quite working by itself and it involved you throwing in other elements, and as you're working on one, suddenly three became one?
Well, it was pretty clear to me that the three separate stories weren't none of them, they weren't strong enough on their own. Like each story just didn't seem to be holding up. So I threw them together before I actually did have a meeting with Susan and Ava. So I didn't really talk about them until I kind of put the three of them together. So yeah, I think it was clear to me that there just was, there wasn't just something needed to happen. And so what happened was like, oh, if I put the three of them together, these three people can interact with each other, and that becomes the story.
Do you have a test audience that you run these things by to see how they work, or is it internal?
It's internal. I'm not sure if that's always a good thing, but I am I am very I tend to be very shy about things. So I kind of like say, okay, I have one public place I can bring it out to before I'm ready to bring it out to more people. So that's what I always do.
Oh, amazing. Talk to me. So it came out in 2001. You're working on it in the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse my ignorance. Where are we technologically? Are we in digital photography at this point, or are you working still with cutting apart photos, laying them on the page that way?
It's more of a hybrid. So digital photography, there were digital cameras around. They were mostly for like high-end commercial photographers might have a digital camera that they could use in the manner that I was photographing. So, taking kind of candid, looser shots, handheld, but they weren't. So what I did with this book was I shot on film and then I scanned the film and worked on it digitally, which I started doing actually with You Are Here. So that was the first one that I did using Photoshop. But again, because at that point, it was a good balance or a good workaround, because the cameras were either, their cameras were still catching up in terms of being able to do the same kind of work that you would do with a handheld 35 millimeter, which is what I wanted to do. So it had this feeling of, movement of, sort of scenes that kind of you happen upon, not scenes that were set and posed.
The character of the ghost that we see in Jonathan's stories, to my mind, looks like a shadow that's being projected. Is that how it was done, or what was the ghost that actually appears in the pieces?
So the ghost was not in the scenes when we did the photographs. So the ghost was, I just did some drawings and then using and blurred them and distorted them and made them sort of somewhat translucent in Photoshop. So I created the ghosts in Photoshop after the fact. But yeah, and the idea, because to me, ghosts probably don't exist, but I like to leave it as a space where we can imagine where a ghost could be. So we needed to have something that could be both a character but also be a shadow at the same time. So I wanted to keep that ambiguity going throughout the story.
Yeah, I love it. I love the fact that it's not in any way humanoid in shape when we see it. It's just very sophisticated. I'm always impressed. I'm always impressed by it. I have to talk about the Neighborhood Mother Goose, which is probably it's one of the children's books that I most associate with the Free Library of Philadelphia because it came out in 2004. I started as a children's librarian in 2005 and did not have, my background was not in children's literature before I started at the
Mm.
library. Did a very quick catch-up course in my first few years. And this book was a godsend to me for so many reasons. It was fantastic in that any kid that walked into the library, if they wanted to see themselves in that book, they could usually find themselves in this. It is so beautiful. It's so vibrant. Again, it's another one that you could publish this tomorrow. And I think with the exchange, with possibly, a couple clothing styles and background images, I don't think anyone would realize that this book is now 20 years old. It was very, very painful when I realized the book has been around for that long. Talk to me about how did the Neighborhood Mother Goose come to be?
So the Neighborhood Mother Goose, I give a great deal of credit to Andrea Davis Pinkney. She and I were just talking about ideas. She at that point had an imprint at Jump at the Sun, called Jump at the Sun at Hyperion. And so at the end of our conversation, because I didn't, when you go to meet with a new editor you haven't worked with, it's always good to really have a good idea of something, like going like, yeah, I've got this and I've got this, but I didn't have all that. I just was like, hey, yeah, I'd like to, maybe we'd love, work with you. Kind of, we just talked. And then she called me up like a day later and said, what about Mother Goose rhymes in the Nina Cruz style? And as soon as she said it, I was like, yes, and it's not because I needed a job, but it was because it just was it just made sense. Like, to me, it just made complete sense to me in so many ways. The book began with Andrea at Jump at the Sun, but eventually moved to Green Willow. And that's where the book was published with them. And it was a really immediately such a fun thing to work on for me. I think kind of just sort of hit all sorts of notes that I kind of didn't know I wanted in terms of storytelling. And I think one of the most exciting things for me about working on that book was that because it was an anthology and each page wasn't a continuous story, it gave me a lot of room and freedom to be really more inventive on every single page than I kind of had felt sort of I could do in other books. Like before that, I kept thinking, well, this page is kind of needed to move the story forward. Whereas here is like, well, what's happening now? Who knows?
Right. How much control did you have over the rhymes that were selected? Were you picking each one and the order, or was it a collaborative effort between you and the publishers to choose the order and the rhyme?
So once we kind of started working on the idea, I went through collections and kind of started looking for rhymes that I thought would lend themselves to an urban illustration. So there were certain things I said, well, okay, I'm just gonna like not have included in the book because they felt too rural, for instance. I mean, a lot of the older rhymes tend to have that. I didn't want any cows. Well, I did have one cow, right? The cow jumping over the moon, but I kind of wanted to put it into a place where you were a little, even if there were elements that were not real and fantastic, the story sort of had the logic of experiencing the stories in the city, so that even if it so some of them are very illogical, but mostly the idea is that the storytelling is we're having an urban experience.
And I mean, even your cowl, obviously over the moon, but still the brownstones are right below. You're very aware that this is not the farmer's Mother Goose.
Exactly. I kind of first collected together the things that I thought would be plausible and be logical within an urban setting. And after that, I just started working with the list. And as I was working on the book, I never really was 100% sure what ones would make it into the final finished book or what order they would take overall, right? So there were certain things ended up getting locked in when I decided to have 2 rhymes on the same page. So once you kind of do that, you kind of lock those into place. Mm-hmm. But in terms of whether the page with Cobbler, Cobbler, Mend My Shoe comes before or after Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, we didn't decide that until we were looking through the whole book and kind of coaxing together how those would work. I think with the exception of wanting to have the Wee Willie Winky at the end with the goose on the rooftop. That was the only one that was like, okay, that's the end. But
at this point, were you still working with dummies, or had you, when if ever, have you transitioned to digital only?
So in this book, I didn't do a like the dummy work. With this book, I did sketches. So drawing out kind of really rough, like what it was I wanted to have on each page and what the type would be, roughly where it would go. I then, once I did my photography, just with those line drawing sketches and scanned those in, then from there, we were always working digitally. But again, I shot film for the book and then scanned it and worked from those.
I know we're getting to some of the later works, and before I jump into the, let's say, post photo collage era, I want to talk a little bit about Sky High Guy. I was looking at this the other day as I was getting ready to sit down and talk to you and just think, what we're going to talk about, and I was blown away because I was thinking, my God, she's so ahead of the curve. When I think about what people 10, 15 years later were doing with like Instagram and doing collage work, or there are so many people now on YouTube who take action figures and they make them into these incredibly cinematic photos of what's going on. And you're so early on with it in this book. How did this come together? What was the inspiration for seeing the Sky High Guy and his adventures during play?
So Sky High Guy is the sequel, in fact, for Below. So Below was the first of the 2 books. And they were inspired by my nephew, Jack, who is the character on the boy on the cover, and kind of inspired by the time that he told me about having dropped one of his action figures into a hole in the stairs at home. And so that was like, well, clearly there's a children's book within this story because, it's a classic trope, the lost toy. And then I kept thinking, and, as the toy stayed in the hole for a significant period of time, which my brother-in-law doesn't like to be reminded of, but that he talked about it more than once. And he was like 2.5, 3 years old when he said, yeah, I dropped it into the hole. And the story, appealed to me both because of the sort of classic idea of the toys that are lost, the toys that are, what are toys doing when they're not with the child, right? Not with oneself, but also that very real to me experience of doing something that seems like a really good idea until afterwards. And I think, oh, I hadn't really thought about the consequences of that idea. That is just such a real emotion for, everybody, because we've all, hopefully we don't do it in any situation that's, dangerous or, any way harmful, but we've all done it, it's like, oh, right. Yeah. So of course, when you drop the toy into the hole, it's no longer in your hand, it's in the hole. not reachable, right? So those things. So that was where the idea came from. And so I just loved, and I loved, and I think it's partly from photography, and I feel like there's a lot of a long tradition, a strong tradition in photography to sort of work with the everyday, work with those tangible things that are part of people's lives. I think photography is really, a medium that loves to just sort of celebrate and explore the detail of kind of the daily in a way that I think maybe because painting takes more time in a way you don't necessarily always look to it to show you, the familiar pots and pans or the spool of thread, all these things that are just sort of like part of the things that we all kind of just sort of see around ourselves. So that's something that photography always seems like you're always looking. I feel like photographers are always looking for stories that work within those things, those daily things. So so that was how Below, and then Sky High Guy got to be the follow-up story. Guy, the character, I made out of Sculpey, because after my nephew had dropped a little Fisher Price character, and I thought, well, that's going to get complicated because maybe I'd have to get permission. And so anyway, so it was fun for me to create a character for the book, and then to have the character actually look a bit like Jack, sort of have the same hair color and sort of complexion and stuff, so I could have this sort of character be kind of like a little mini me that he drops into the under the stairs. And then when Christy Ottaviano, the editor, said, "What about a sequel?" I thought, well, he went down, so I guess he's got to go up.
Go back up, of course. Do you still is he still around someplace?
Oh, of course.
With you or with your nephew?
Oh, with me.
Okay, all right. Too precious
No.
to give away. Just
Right.
one,
Well,
or did you have multiple versions of him just in case?
So for the first book, there was just one. But then when I was doing Sky High Guy, I thought, well, if he wasn't really throwing ready, so I actually cast him in a mold, and I made a few extras that are painted instead of the Sculpey. So there's a few extra kind of ones that aren't as mobile. For some strange reason, I thought that my character had to be able to turn his head back and forth and move his arms and all that stuff, which means that, his head comes off. It's not really, a play toy. It's a photograph toy.
No, but you're telling me that there's a possibility of merch out there, so you can just keep casting these, and
Yeah, and it never seemed to happen, that kind of thing. But yeah.
So we're getting into the later books now, and I have to say, librarian brain. When I think of illustrators, many people I tend to categorize, and Chris Van Allsburg, watercolor is something that I go to for that. For you, I always think of photo collage, but the later works aren't photo collage. You're getting into digital collage. And why? What happened?
Well, a few things happened. I think one of the things, one of the things that has, I feel, maybe always been true is that there has always been a sense that photo collage and photographs are not illustration and aren't children's books. And I have always been and I'm very good at kind of sticking with and sort of stubborn-minded person who can kind of see going along with the things that I love to do. But I was also very much aware that people didn't know what to do with it very often, and even though something like the Neighborhood Mother Goose has had amazing reception and One Hot Summer Day has done really well, there's also been this sort of sense that I was operating in a space that felt a little like it didn't completely fit in the world of books. And I've talked to, we have a few examples. If you think about the numbers of of books that are done photographically, I think that kind of reinforces that a little bit. That if it was something that everybody thought worked really well, there would be lots and lots and lots of them. I mean, I still love them. I'm not saying I'm not trying to disown the work. I'm just saying that I was feeling a little bit like it was hard to find the place to create the projects that could be created within that language. That's really, I guess, what it was. So the last two projects I did that were photographed were the haiku book, Richard Wright Haiku, with Seeing Into Tomorrow. And that was a perfect place to use photography. It was exactly the right medium for that book. Richard Wright himself was a photographer, aside from that being a great way to show and illustrate those poems. And then I did A Girl Like Me, which again worked out to be, I think, a perfect poem and perfect place to use photography. But I didn't have another project lined up that felt like it fit for that. But I also had some other ideas that I felt like I wanted to do and needed to find a place to fit them. So, you know, after years of going back and forth and talking about maybe looking at other styles, it felt like I finally kind of came to something that felt, again, like me, like it started to speak in a voice that felt like my photography in a way, the voice that felt like the person that I was, a collage, colorful, sort of people-centered kind of illustration style. So I had some projects that I thought, well, let's just see what happens. See what happens if we put those out there in the world. As it turns out, it was kind of a perfect timing for that because COVID hit right about when I was beginning to work on both of those books.
How was it difficult to reintroduce yourself as different art style?
I was surprised to see that it was not so difficult, in fact. You know, that was one of the questions I had about, you know, kind of changing things up and shifting things. But, you know, I sent, well, let's see, I guess the first project that came through was Not Done Yet, right? So that's the Shirley Chisholm book. Mm-hmm. And so the author, Tamika Fryer-Brown, and I have the same agent, Marietta Zacher. And so Marietta knew that I was, you know, again, experimenting, thinking about how to stretch a little bit, change a little bit. And so she said, well, here's this project. Do you think you might be interested? And so I did an art sample that she sent to Tamika, who liked it as well. So then, you know, she subbed both of us on that project, and so it worked out, right? And then I sent, and that was with Carol Hintz at Millbrook. And Carol and I had worked on the Richard Wright project as well as on Girl Like Me together. So she already, you know, had no problem saying, okay, you want to do this instead? Go ahead, do that instead. Do this. We like this art. Let's go for it. And then I then also that same fall, I guess, submitted I'm Not Small to Virginia Duncan. And she said, I love it. Let's do it. So, you know, in both cases, it was never a question of like, are you sure you want to try something different? So, which was really kind of nice to see, you know.
Sure. I'm really curious. Excuse me. Not Done Yet has been living behind my head as we've been talking, so I don't know how much people have actually see it. Talk to me about the patterns that you are introducing. Every page has these really, in some cases, very subtle, in some cases, very, very dramatic changes. There's very few flat images throughout. There's a lot of design and pattern work that comes in. How did that come together?
My interest in collage and using that as sort of the language of the visual language of the book. So pattern is a great way to have the page be very lively. But, you know, Shirley Chisholm was a clothes horse. And one of the things that, as I started researching images, I kept seeing all of her outfits. And I personally, I'm not wearing patterns today, but I love wearing patterns. I thought it was better not to wear patterns for the video. but I love wearing patterns. I'm always wearing something with a pattern on it in most cases. So what I wanted, so to me, it was a point of connection, like just sort of an emotional point of connection, was that this woman dressed the nines, and I loved her outfits. I loved the clothes. So I was just like, yeah, let's keep moving those patterns out off of her and into the space, into the world of the book.
I love it. I'm not a pattern person. I always dress in black, except for today when I said I'm going to be on video. Where's some color? And I'm the exact same color as the bookcases behind me. So that was a win. When you're working on, okay, I'm still going to hang out with Not Done Yet. What are the challenges for you when you're not the author on it, you're illustrating? You know, how much say do you feel you can bring into a story when you're not responsible for the text as well?
Well, what's nice is, and I've had, just a few experiences where I've illustrated something where the author and I might have a conversation back and forth. There was a book that Elizabeth Fitzgerald Howard wrote that I did photo illustrations for years ago, and then there's this. But most, but usually there's very little that I sort of see or think might need any. I might need to respond to in any way different from what I think the text is wanting to do. Mm-hmm. So that's usually not a problem. What I think the first thing one does is one then sort of sits with the text long enough to try and understand what it is, why it is the author has made the choices they've made, right? So that's the first thing to kind of say, okay, well, why did they choose this? And particularly the things that you're not sure about, because those are the places that you really need to understand, like, okay, what's going on here? So there was one contribution that I made really to Not Done Yet. There were kind of two beats at the end of the book. First beat was she had moved the path forward, making a better nation possible. And the image was going to be of a lot of leaders. I think it was Obama, Clinton, and all those folks. And then she wanted to have a separate image, another beat where you then see the children. And so my idea was that we combine those two things together, which actually then freed up a little more back matter space, I think, but also was a stronger way to sort of say that thing that she wanted to say, which was that, it sort of continues both in our leadership and also continues in what you as the reader might be able to do.
I love, and I just want to call out the fact that your use of yellow on this spread is fantastic. For people who may not be able to see it, the quote is in full yellow, and there's no yellow anywhere else except Shirley Chisholm's glasses on her face. And I just visually going from that bright yellow on the cool shade background over across the spread to her face, it just draws you right over and right in. That is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, I had to point that out to say, like, I see you. I see what you've done there. That's amazing.
Well, I must be honest, that really decision of the yellow was Danielle Carnitos at Millbrook. She's the one who chose that for the background, but I mean, for
Danielle, I see you. That was
see Danielle, because she's a good egg and she's a great designer.
I know we're running a little long, and I just want to see what's next. What's in the future? What's coming up for you?
So the next thing coming out is Lift Off, back with Millbrook again. And Lift Off is the story of how the Apollo moon missions made Alma Thomas's art soar. And, this is a dual narrative story talking about this painter, Alma Thomas, modern abstract artist from the 60s and 70s, and how she was inspired by the Apollo missions for some of her paintings. She did a series of space paintings. And so this takes one of her paintings that I have at the end of the book, called Snoopy Sees the Sunrise, and talks about that painting and shows her, and then also shows the moon mission that it was inspired by, which was the Apollo 10 mission. So the Apollo 10 mission astronauts decided to nickname their spaceship Charlie Brown, and the lunar rover was Snoopy. And so that's the background for her painting. And then it shows just these two stories going back and forth. Actually, I think I skipped it back. Anyway, so that's coming out in November.
Do you look back? Do you ever look and say, you know, if I could do this again, or 20th anniversary of so and so is coming out, let's republish it, but let me change this or re-illustrate. Does that ever tempt you?
Yeah, there's always something that I look at and I think, oh, I wish I'd done this a little differently. But you know, I don't know that it's hard to imagine really going back into things, but I certainly, there's always a little something that I would tweak. I'm not sure that I would ever redo any book from start to finish, but I would definitely tweak some things.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today and being our inaugural guest on whatever we're calling. Do you have a name for me yet, by any chance?
Gosh, well, you know, we did talk a lot, so I kind of didn't really have time to think about that.
It's okay. You can email me later on. For people who are listening who want to learn more, where can they find you? Where do you post and put stuff out there?
So I am on Instagram, Cruz Nina, and I'm sure you just look up my name. And I have a website, which is www.ninacruz.com, which is very simple and easy to find me. And I keep it pretty up to date with events, and I have some nice handouts and stuff like that. I have a teacher guide for I'm Not Small if they're interested in using math concepts with I'm Not Small, and coloring pages and other stuff.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been lovely.